material, but what I want to show you actually, this is the area, you know, and I want to show you that they have started, you know, to demolish most of the building, and we want to compare that with other way of dealing with this kind of tin buildings, like in Grenoble, in France, where they have select another way, a way of regeneration, in fact, and of course there is this big example of in Switzerland, in Geneva, of this building with the France Graph work and the SAM, the laboratory of sauvegarde de l'architecture moderne in Switzerland, and so this is for us, you know, this question is one of the biggest questions to deal with house. So this was the point I wanted to share with you actually.
Thank you very much, Remy. I think that the renewal in this case has very much to do with also transforming the neighborhood from a social standpoint, transforming the identity through making architectural improvements, because the quality of housing also somehow changes the perception of self-worth in this case, and we'll talk about perhaps Lacaton and Vasal's Bordeaux example later, but it is also very much about somehow reformulating the attitude towards these neighborhoods which have at some point became dilapidated or misused and so on. So there's a question of not only the architectural reformulation and improvement, but also the social consequences or the identity issues that these interventions produce. I hope that our screening or live stream is working meanwhile. I would like to pick up the discussion with Saveria, because when talking about an integral approach to urban renewal, we have to look at these broader challenges that this entails. And that is not only related to the spatial or social aspects, but also the invisible aspects which form a substantial part of the way that we live today, such as utilizing big data, the Internet of Things to produce smart cities which are communicating and adapting and changing with its inhabitants. And also there is an array of designerly and planning interventions that we can utilize these technologies for, such as bioclimatic design, which significantly affect the expression of the buildings, the experience of living in a city, mitigating urban heat islands, greening roofs, and so on, sustainable public transport, and so on. However, their implementation still seems a challenge. What is, in your opinion, the result or our result of the new European Bauhaus discussions, which could perhaps permanently influence and implement these practices, because there are still exceptions in terms of implementation to the way that we plan and use cities, and which best practices would you perhaps single out as being instructive in this regard?
Thank you for your question. I think it's really, really...
For a moment.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me well? Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
So thank you for the question. I really think it's very interesting, as I am currently
But
working...
it is breaking a little bit.
Okay, maybe now is better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I am working on this topic right now in several European projects. So I wanted to start my reflection a bit questioning the theme of smart cities, because the implementation of technologies nowadays in cities tend to go beyond this definition of smart city. And recently I was asking myself, are we really building smart cities or more dumb cities? Because when we apply technologies a lot in cities without really considering how these technologies have effects and how we can analyze the result of these technologies, we cannot make the city smart. Making a city smart is not only applying new instruments, new technologies, even if we are having the most advanced technology we can think about. But I think that the crucial point is to understand how to use this tool and how to analyze the results. I think that only if we understand how to use them, how to read the result, and how to interpret data, we can really build smarter cities. And this means that people must be behind the implementation of technologies. As architects, I think that we have the big responsibility of understanding what can be the role of technologies as instruments of our professions, because we can be able through technologies to fill the gap of knowledge that currently we have in understanding cities, because especially in the south of Europe we have a huge variety of cities behavior in relation with climate behavior, climate change, and the differences in different cities. So using technology can really help architects, professionals, and people that have to work within the cities and within the transformation of city in understanding how in practical we can approach the targets that we will need to reach. So for 2050, we will need to become carbon neutral as much as possible. And I really think that using in the right way technology can help us. I have a specific case in which we tried to implement this vision, which is the Rock project that is finished a few months ago. So in the Rock project in the city of Bologna, we try to understand how to regenerate spaces that were in the city center of the city, and that was underused spaces with a lot of heritage. We were in fact really in the city center of Bologna in the university district. And in order to understand how to regenerate this space, we did two main things. We, on the one hand, implemented technologies on the bioclimatic side. So we implemented sensors and we did simulations on the microclimate in the area. And parallelly, we ran a living lab with citizens and with people. And the results of these two aspects of the work that we did in the city were, in my opinion, crucial for really understanding how to regenerate the space, how to really deal with the transformation of cities. Because on the one hand, the sensor part gave us new insights on the climatic behavior of these underused spaces, and we learned a lot. Also, things that we didn't expect that were present, and combining this, let's say, hard part with the living lab, in which we asked the people how they would use that space, how they were currently using the space. I think that we arrived to design as architects a new use of space that was more deep into the specificity of the areas. So I wanted to end my reflection with this idea that for going toward the future of our city and understanding how to regenerate spaces that are not equal to any other spaces. So we live in spaces that are really, really different one to the other. We really need to combine this part of gaining new knowledge from technology within the smart part that, in my opinion, are people. So both the citizens and us architects as professionals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saveria. I like the concept of bringing it back to the human and not relying on technology itself. And actually, the next question and what you brought up and what Remy brought up somehow comes together in a very specific case of mass housing. So the next question is directed first to Luciana, but I would also like Remy to reflect on it afterwards, because state subsidized housing has, in its best variants, produced both the programmatic standards of minimal spatial and functional requirements, which in many cases guaranteed that these developments were built to a degree of quality which free market speculation often lacks. At least in the case of Croatia, it was like this. And also their mass production, in the best case, could perhaps ensure a certain degree of execution quality, or this was the case when they were built. On the other hand, social housing has in many environments been a symbol or become a symbol of low quality, both in spatial as well as in construction performance. So when discussing social housing, I think we have two issues that we can raise here. And one is related to the capacity of the municipality or city or state to direct these efforts into a retrofitting endeavor of a larger scale, where the volume of the units provided ensures a development of methods and approaches both in spatial organization as in retrofitting. Just the pure mass of the implementation somehow guarantees that it will be worth developing a certain new technology to develop this and to improve this. On the other hand, the existing social housing of a lesser quality produces an acute need for improvement, which is often reduced to thickening insulation and energy saving solutions, but it can, in its best variants, be an impetus for ingenious solutions, such as Le Caton Masal's Bordeaux example mentioned a little while ago. So what is, in your opinion, the potential of social housing exactly when we speak of reuse, both existing and reprogrammed, and also the impact that it can have in the development both of housing standards, technological standards of retrofitting technologies, and so on? It's a long question, sorry.
There is a lot of questions, but I will try to approach some of them. First, thank you, Mia, for the introduction and for all these interesting issues. I would like to start from talk about the main problem that I think that is in this specific issue, because I think that interventions in existing buildings are in fact an essential opportunity to improve their energy performance, as we known with the so-called retrofitting, and in this way contribute to sustainable cities. And in the context of housing, and especially at controlled costs like social housing, it is essential to improve the thermal comfort of the inhabitants, which means that special privilege should be given to passive measures designed to reduce energy consumption for heating and cooling purposes. In fact, in Portugal, as in other Southern European countries, one of the main problems relates to energy poverty. That is, situations where people cannot achieve adequate levels of domestic comfort during winter or summer, and due to several factors, and in this case, low incomes, high energy costs, and or building characteristics with poor energy efficiency. Being the social housing the sector most affected by this problem, according to statistics from the European Energy Poverty Observatory. Another important issue in this context, and in Portugal specifically, is the intermittent heating system, which assumes different logics from the most of other European countries. For example, in other countries, the heating system usually works 24/7 during the winter season, while in Portugal, this does not happen. People are used to stay cold at homes because they don't have money or adequate means to maintain their houses warm. Also, retrofitting represent particular challenges that demand an adequate legal framework. And this is one of the cases, the intermittent heating system, that requires an adaptation of the legislation from the Central European standard to the national reality. And the other is the essential balance between the preserving the existing buildings and adapting the current energy needs and housing comfort of buildings with architectural value, because the social housing is also heritage with the architectural value in terms of the whole of the, because they represent a big part of a city, and so in this case with also some architectural value. And in this sense, some of the recent legislation, like the one related with nearly zero energy building, the NEBgS buildings, already present exception reference values for intervention projects. They give more responsibility to the project authors, and they have to provide solutions to minimize the technical issues and improve the comfort of spaces. But because different solutions can achieve the same results, it is important to understand the impact of these measures on the transformation of the buildings, namely on the architectural language of these buildings, compared to the effective gains in the domestic comfort of the dwellings, of course. Speaking about the role of the government, that is one of the questions that you made, in Portugal, issues related to the improvement of energy performance of buildings and the promotion of the sustainable cities are gaining increasing importance and attracting greater government attention, which is reflected in the current incentives like the one that result in the new generation of housing policies. And there are some instruments like Efficient Housing 2020 that promotes interventions associated with energy efficiency and the improving of the solid waste management. One of the most evident change in the past 20 years was the extension of the scope of action to rehabilitation. That is very important, instead of new housing construction, and most of all, the investment in rental solutions instead of some ownership. In Porto, specifically in Porto, the municipal council has been played an essential role in promoting the rehabilitation of state subsidized of social housing. The work started mostly in the 1990s and increased mainly since 2000, especially with Domus Social, that is a company of the municipality of Porto. The interventions that have been made focus mainly on the general maintenance of the buildings, which include the treatment of the facades, the roofs and common areas, and gradually reveal some implementation of some measures of improve the thermal comfort of the dwellings, like the application of continuous insulation in the exterior walls or the replacement of the window frames, among others. But analyzing these interventions, this massive intervention in Porto, we must conclude that it is still important to deconstruct some pre-established concepts, I would say. For example, one of the most common solutions that we see, especially in low-cost interventions like this one, is a solution for the facade that includes the application of external thermal insulation composite system on the existing external walls is a very common solution. But in fact, this solution may not be the best solution depending on different factors such as the material and the structural composition of the walls. For example, several buildings in Porto from the mid-20th century have perimeter external walls made of granite masonry. So it could be other solutions than that. Also, it's important to consider the transformation of the architectural language associated with this type of action. Another example, for example, is the replacement of the windows frame, usually from wood to aluminium or from single to double glaze. And it also depends on several aspects such as location, orientation, building characteristics. And I think that this leads to an important subject, that is the investment in technical projects and preliminary studies that allow the analysis of different solutions and that allow to reflect about the potentialities and limitations of the different strategies, both from the cost-benefit relationship concerning the energy efficiency of buildings, and also between the impact on the architectural heritage and the improvement in the quality of life of the inhabitants. And these studies could also benefit from a greater cooperation between the industries and research centers. For example, an example of that was the city of Lyon that was shown by Remy from France Graph. They made a preliminary study from different solutions for the facade to see the cost benefit of that solutions, and then decide what to do. Likewise, we should consider also these recent interventions that has a laboratory for a more in-depth analysis of the actions. For example, to see if the buildings or these interventions improve effectively the thermal comfort of the buildings, and if really adjust to the social and economic status of the inhabitants. And this has been one of the proposals of an ongoing research project at FAUP at this time. And at least I would like to say that it's also essential to ensure a greater participation and involvement of the inhabitants, like the local architects said in their presentations, because the inhabitants' experience is, of course, an indicator of the architectural quality resulting from the confrontation between the design and the use of spaces, and an ongoing commitment and partnership between the inhabitants and the municipal council would benefit future interventions.
Thank you very much, Luciana. I was actually wishing that Remy could also reflect on this topic, but I took a look at the clock. So perhaps we do the round of questions, and then if we have a few minutes left, we can come back to this. But this somehow concludes the broader scale of these questions on the level of the city and on the level of the neighborhoods and dealing with complexes. But what you mentioned, the technological aspect of this, and I would just maybe like a short reflection from Adrian, since you were exploring cutting-edge technologies which aid in architectural design and utilizing restoring existing housing, but I think that what technology tells us about this can also be really challenging aspect of these experiences, because especially, for instance, when we talk about protecting modernist heritage, just when we look at the glazed surfaces on one hand and the fact that less windows is more energy efficient, we somehow need to find a way to meet these two in technological solutions which perhaps don't appear to the first most obvious technological solutions. So what can technology, construction technology offer us in this regard? No, your microphone is off. Can't turn it off. Okay, maybe because you're the facilitator, you've been disabled for time. While you're figuring it out, maybe we can move on to Marianti. And then come back to this question. It does also relate to actually what I wanted to ask you, Marianti, because you've been involved in the Sofia project and innovative approaches to heritage protection, and if we view heritage not in the historic sense of the word, but up until the examples of 20th century architecture, how would these relate to the questions of housing, particularly in our southern climatic and historic environments that also are very rich modernist heritage, and what models and best practices were identified within this research project, which would be relevant to point out in these new European house markets and in these new agendas.
Sure, thank you for the floor, giving me the floor. So first I want to stand on the term southern climatic and historic environments, because in fact, this is a changing term, this is a changing context. I think we're in a verge of irreversible climate change. And at that point, we have seen a lot of its phenomena very evidently in the Southern Europe. I think that last summer was a very big indicator of that, with extreme temperatures, wildfires, as well as phenomena as the rise of the sea level. And I want to connect how those changes interconnect with cultural heritage, especially in the Southern Europe. And this is evident if we think about some simple examples, such as if the sea level rises, then Venice is going to drown, or vice versa. If Santorini is overcrowded with over-tourism, because it's a place of interest, of cultural heritage, then the emissions hurt the environment. So there is this very big interconnectivity between those phenomena, cultural heritage, and then the climatic issues Southern Europe is currently facing. This is one remark I want to make. And the other one is that, of course, when we talk about cultural heritage, we're not thinking about monuments or museumified places of heritage, but it's also our very living environments. It's the city of Dubrovnik, it's the Athens, it's also after the post-World War II housing complexes. All those consist of cultural heritage. And we can also broaden this phasm and the spectrum into other cases of intangible heritage, but I'm not going to go into this. So, of course, I agree also with Luciana that heritage is also housing, and environmental impact. When we think about retrofitting, we have also to think about the environmental impact of retrofitting versus the environmental impact of those housing complexes themselves. We have to calculate. There's a balance that we have to really find out, and we have to always keep up with technology to see if there are solutions that can provide a better balance. When we talk about cultural heritage, there is a lot of intelligence being brought up by conventions, conferences, as well as like global agreements and protocols and things like that. This also is true about environmental issues. So seeing those two sectors, they are providing from, I think, 1972 with a lot of material to contemplate upon. But unlikely with environmental issues, cultural heritage is not working with horizontal kind of approaches. This is the problem. This is a universal problem, because even if UNESCO or any other organization issues regulations or issues guidelines for dealing with cultural heritage, then again, it has to be more specific. We have to look at the specifics. So the best practices on how to adapt cultural heritage places into new technologies and new ways of living is looking in a very detail on the specifics with experts that can provide you with data, with things that you can actually, that quantitative, you can actually take and make a case out of. And also I want to do this remark about a new European Bauhaus that has this kind of holistic approach on issues. And I think this fits also when it comes to cultural heritage, that we have to look at environmental issues, we have to look at what the experts say, and we have to also engage and bring up let's say, a vibrant discourse with users, with the people that actually use those places. This has also been mentioned by previously from the previous presenters, and I think this is also a very central point. So I believe that we really need to look into the specifics when it comes to cultural heritage, and not talking generally about protecting it or renewing it. We have to talk always with a case at hand.
I very much agree with you, Marianne. Thank you very much for this, because we somehow also tend to observe the built structures as almost scenographic elements which are unrelated to the practices of life and the knowledge of generations before, and the vitality of the environments that we deal with on one hand, and on the other you raised a really important question of what is the Southern context that we deal with now. It's much as an old-fashioned term almost, or has to be redefined in the way that we talk about it today, as much as involving users in a certain process. We now talk of humans and more realize that we have so much more actors in the environment to consider here. And actually learning from these occurrences, perhaps more related to housing than to the use of existing structure, but still popping up in the discussion of reuse and retrofitting, is this aspect of improving buildings to make them more energy efficient, which seems to look away from the obvious, because certain traditional building techniques have
João Pedro, estou em sessão, viu? Estou em direto.
And yet many of them would perhaps show up quite low in classifications of energy efficiency measurements, and we've known this for a long while, both empirically and also from architecture without architects. So referring to what Bernard Rudolfsky brought out 50 years ago about many thick walls and underground atria and solar chimneys and covered walkways. So what can we implement from these lessons, and how can we reuse this analog knowledge, which has been empirically tested in centuries of those habitats, to produce contemporary and sustainable, geographically specific, energy efficient dwellings? And this is a question actually which is directed to Clara.
Thank you very much, Mia. I hope I don't have too much sound around me because I am in the middle of the hurricane. I would start to begin by saying that buildings are the material and physical memory of humanity. So when we are studying the production of the people, the ordinary ones who are studying their culture, and that culture allowed them over time to identify how the thick walls in the southern countries are, or how the greenhouses and how all the appliance they can put in a building, natural appliance they can put in the building, will help the building giving more comfort to them. But all those knowledge that was passing through generations by the direct contact between people while they are growing and while they are learning a trade, stopped with the industrialization and with contemporary life. So nowadays we have to find those teachings by research. We have to go to the countryside, we have to go to the cities and to analyze buildings. We have to draw, for instance, in a Bernadotte camp, we'll draw the buildings in a way that the proximity with the building is very big, and we have all the details. We can understand how the building works, but also we want to know that not because we want to stay in the past, because the past is important, but we want to bring those knowledge to present. So, for instance, when we are doing nowadays a building with a lightweight structure, usually in a modern building you use plasters, cardboards, the plasters and something like that. But why not go back to the ancient systems, the wattle and daub, the colombage, or in Portuguese the frontais, NEBgS, the systems that allow more mass, so a better response to climate than these new systems. And also, while you are doing that, you are learning how to work wood, how to make the connection. And taking that in mind, in the past 2 years here in faculty, we have made some workshops with students. Before COVID, we are doing another one in a month's time, where they will learn how to build this kind of wooden structures. So they would make the parts, they will assemble the parts and see how they are done. So it's not a stay in the past, but trying to bring to the present. And the students usually they start to make transformation of the original systems to a more contemporary design. I am also seeing the clock. I think I will shorten my answer because Adrian still, if he is has a micro. So thank you very much, Mia. I hope I answer your question.
Thank you, Clara. We're really just picking on all these important topics, and I think we can go on for another hour easily. Instead of wrapping up, I'm going to leave the word to Adrian to just provide us with a few punchlines on the technological aspect and to wrap up the discussion then before the break. Thank you all very much for participating, and Adrian, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do my best to connect the dots. First off, like connecting and everything from the revealing, I think that finally we can answer the question asked by Cedric Price. He said technology is an answer, but what was the question? And I think in the times of the planetary crisis, we need to look for robust and quantifying methods. Just they are going to measure the actual impact of architecture on the environment and nature. Housing is the core of our cities, towns, villages, and this is also the place we spend most of our time. Today, we know that 75% of European building stock needs renovation, and I'm sure, and I know in Portugal is much more, and probably in all South is much more. So we need not only look to renovation, but we need to enhance energy efficiency and resident comfort, which is a critical issue that we already talked about that in Portugal. So here we can use digital technologies that they allow simulating building performance, energy consumption. This is the topic we already talked, but another which is important that Clara mentioned about the materials, and I would write the question of embodied carbon and assessing the life cycle of materials and buildings, which is super important. Finally, all actors that they are involved in investment process, we should look to work hand in hand, and we're talking about the integrative design when all the partners are sitting together and working just to make sure that our projects are regenerating the planet. The topics of retrofitting, reusing, recovering are crucial always when they are within the planetary boundaries and when we have the notion of the degrowth or post-growth, so we're not producing more than is needed. Finally, what was raised, but I'm not sure it was if we elaborate enough on that collaboration between all professionals, so not only professionals of building industry, but also chemists, meteorologists, physicists, is crucial. We need to take action because design as usual is not possible anymore. Probably, finally, sustainability is not about people. For me, because it becomes another anthropocentric concept, we need to look for more biocentric concepts to regenerate our planet, and housing could be one of the means to regenerate. I think that's connecting the dots. I give back the floor to Mia, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. You gave the perfect wrap-up to our discussion and to the forward orientation of research and discussions to come. So I guess we have a break for another 10 minutes. I think we ate up 5 of it, and we'll see each other on the main stage, right, in the recap sessions and final discussions for next steps. It was really interesting for me to hear all of your contributions and see you at some of the next events.
Thank you, Mia.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.